For a couple of decades, the Sonic series has been a dumpster fire, with fans paying to maintain the flame. It's become something of a Stockholm syndrome for a dedicated fanbase unwilling to admit there's a problem or the core reasons behind it. When looking over yearly lists of the worst AAA games, you'll find classics such as Superman 64, Bubsy 3D, E.T., and numerous Sonic titles in what may be a world record attempt. The franchise has seen countless games of quality that destroy reputations and bankrupt companies. Yet the fanbase still rapidly holds out hope that the past glory of the 90s can be recaptured with the next release, yet the series continues to fall short. You may have never thought about this, but Sonic, compared to other game series, is on an island with few residents. Why is the fanbase split? And more important, what the heck happened to Sonic? Sonic's fanbase is often split between the retro 2D style and modern mainstream releases, which started with Adventure on the Dreamcast. It's not to say there isn't some crossover with some fans appreciating both, but for what appears to be the majority, they fall strictly into one camp when it comes to preference, and even if they like both styles, it's not in equal terms. So what made the original Sonic games good? Sonic is easy to play yet hard to master, and when talking about games from the earliest generations, this was often key to creating a blockbuster experience. The controls for the first game were straightforward. Left and right moved Sonic, up and down let the player look up and down beyond the scope of the screen. Pressing down while in motion allowed Sonic to roll, and all action buttons allowed Sonic to jump. There's also a ton of single-use items to pick up throughout the game. I can still recall picking up the controller for the first time in 1991. The feeling of flying through a level was joyful, and then you realize with speed comes risk, and those can hurt, ending the game altogether. Coins give you life, and just like Mario, jumping on top of the enemy damages them. The stages often have multiple paths, secret areas, and obstacles to tackle. The music and visuals are both outstanding. At one time, this game series was so inspirational Michael Jackson came on board and contributed to Sonic 3. For a game aimed at the masses, it does something else right. The original Sonic games were turbocharged action platformers that told their story through in-game cues, and in doing so didn't waste the player's time. This is critical for a game that's intended to be played redundantly, as the player continues to learn and master level after level. Yet the series is very approachable to just about any skill level. You can get hurt every time you run fast, yet still beat the game. If you really want to challenge yourself, it becomes an off-road racer, where you've got to learn the course and navigate it without air. And if you watch any speedrunning examples, that's precisely what you're going to see. The way the game was handled in some manner mirrors another popular platformer, and personal favorite of mine, Mega Man. Speaking on the importance of game control complexity, Inafune shared this about working on the first game in the series. I often heard people say, Mega Man can't crouch, but we actually had a dot graphic of him crouching while we were working on 1. Our wise leader, however, wanted a system that utilized simple controls, yet offers deep gameplay. On the NES, with only a split second to see a slight height difference, the player wouldn't really be able to differentiate between a projectile that could only be dodged by jumping and one that could only be dodged by crouching. That was the reason we decided to go with a jumping-only system for Mega Man 1 and 2, and I think we did a good job of refining it. Sonic 2 was a slight step up, adding to the formula via a 2-player co-op campaign and racing experience with Tails, a new companion. You could also select Tails or Sonic alone to play through the entire game, though they were mechanically the same character at this point. A new spin dash was also added if you held down while stationary and pressed any action button. Sonic CD was next, and Sega considered it a flagship title for the Mega CD. The game mechanics were essentially the same, though the execution was slightly altered. A lot of what Sonic CD offered was a step forward in game visuals achieved by using new, advanced, and unique hardware. The game featured around 8 minutes of animation done by the legendary Toei. It also focused on a unique time travel mechanic, allowing the user to experience each level's past and future, in addition to the present. Sonic 3 was so massive, Sega later decided it was best to split the game into a 2-part release due to the costs associated with the storage requirements. Part 1 released as Sonic 3, followed by Part 2 named Sonic & Knuckles. The duo is considered a masterpiece that greatly expanded the world, lore, and expectations of what was to come. While the Mega Drive was still supported, a number of other Sonic games also released that I don't consider part of the mainstream series. Games such as Sonic Drift, which was the start of the Sonic Racing series, Sonic Pinball, Sonic the Fighters, Sonic Blast, Knuckles Chaotix, a number of mainstream remakes for less powerful platforms, and a few original titles for less popular Sega systems like the Game Gear and Master System. With the release of Sonic and Knuckles for the Mega Drive in 1994, the series saw its final mainline release for an entire console generation. Or was that actually the case? Is Sonic Sega's Mario? If going by the general consensus, you'd believe the answer was yes. After all, at one point in the 90s, Sonic was outpacing Mario in sales, and later they would team up, co-headlining different games. It was often presented as clear of a head-to-head matchup as comparing RBI Baseball to Baseball Stars, John Madden Football to Joe Montana Football, and Digimon to Pokemon. While this was certainly an argument that could be made in the early 90s, things have changed. And that's no longer the case. Sonic has remained mainstream due in large part to nostalgia, a high appeal via targeted marketing, including cartoons aimed at elementary-aged children, and one of, if not the only, mass appeal and well-received movie series based on a video game. Sonic as an intellectual property is still a hot commodity. However, Sonic as a game series, it still sells games, but more often than not, they're some of the worst received major studio releases for a current home console generation during a given calendar year. To make matters worse, Sonic as a game series has not made efforts to maintain its fanbase, as those gamers quickly age out of the target and narrow demographic that Sega has admittedly chased. With Mario, Nintendo hasn't figured out the media angle for that intellectual property end yet, but mainstream Mario games continue to not only be considered the standard bearer of the genre, they're often regarded as some of the best games released in any given year. When moving into the 3D era, the Mario series released genre-defining titles such as 64, Galaxy, and Odyssey, while Sonic had, well, there was adventure, but that was a borrowed or at minimum an inspired idea, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So why in the world of video games does a Mario continue to find success while Sonic is mostly a laughingstock, with a very dedicated fan base whose fondest memories are stuck in the 90s, or they're of an age where they're still learning to ride a bicycle? Defining how fans see different series over large periods of time. In order to better understand what happened to Sonic, let's run down a few classifications to see how a series can fall in or out of favor with a group of gamers. Series of mass appeal. Most of the series I can think of that have maintained mass appeal are Nintendo properties, and they all share one thing in common. Fans of the series will enjoy the majority of the mainline games regardless of the platform or era they released. Legends of Zelda, Pokemon, and Super Mario are prime examples. These games just work. And when there's a drastic change in presentation, the base mechanics and concepts are generally kept in place across the board, even when moving from 2D to 3D. There's typically care given to a series to ensure that the next game in line will live up to the hype of the last one released, and when that fails, things are put on hold until a game worthy of expectations can be delivered to the consumer base. Sequential releases. These are fans of a series that can appreciate games from the era they first experienced the series through to the most recent releases, but rarely going backward. Football Manager, Europa Universalis, Civilization, and to a lesser degree, SimCity are the best examples I can think of here. Almost always, new games that embody these characteristics are literal expansions of their predecessors, so the user will almost always miss out on quality of life improvements and game advancements by going back to an older version, making them less enjoyable to play overall. Games under one developer. Sometimes properties change developers and the results can be divisive. While the series may retain a similar fanbase, there is often not much carryover. Take NBA Jam for example. Midway knocked it out of the park with their first release, creating one of the most profitable arcade machines of all time. They followed it up with TE, another bestseller that moved the series forward. Midway didn't own the name though, Acclaim did, and they had a lopsided partnership, netting Acclaim nearly all series-generated revenue and exclusive rights to all home console ports and profits. So when Midway demanded a more equitable share of the profits, Acclaim felt the NBA Jam name was all they needed to make it work, so they cut ties with Midway. Midway would go on to make their own series based on their NBA Jam concept called Hang Time. And while the series likely didn't perform as well as they hoped, possibly in part to the public not fully understanding the situation and believing it was an NBA Jam knockoff, it was still well received. The acclaimed developed NBA Jam games were widely panned and would eventually kill the series' reputation. Earthworm Jim is another example of the original developer finding success only for another studio to take over with Earthworm Jim 3D. A game so poorly received, it killed the series in the 90s, and it's yet to return. There are a ton of examples here that we won't dive into, such as Fallout finding more success after changing devs, and Harvest Moon finding less. Intellectual property cash grabs. Intellectual property cash grabs are about as they sound. Instead of the focus being on an artistic vision and polishing a game until ready, the priority is on putting out a product within a tight budget and time frame. There can be a number of reasons for this, such as the limited relationship between Philips and Nintendo, which gave Philips rights to develop games for their CDI based on existing Nintendo IP without much oversight. This resulted in 3 lackluster releases in the Legends of Zelda series. A license such as Barbie, or most of the content planned for consoles such as the Amico, Leapfrog, or the V-Smile, usually rely on known properties such as Hot Wheels or Sesame Street to give what would generally be considered trash content a connection worth considering for parents and the less informed. There's also series such as Metal Gear Solid, which are headed by someone with a creative vision that drives sales to that series, but when they depart, there's a rush to put out anything possible with the name attached to milk unsuspected series fans before they figure out the company no longer cares about them or maintaining the existing standard of quality. Sonic fits here in some ways, as there's more games where Sonic is making the sales pitch rather than a quality game selling Sonic. This philosophy wasn't the core of the original series though. It's more complex than that. It took hard work for Sega to get to this point, so let's talk about the category I feel best suits this situation and explore exactly how we ended up here. The Mega Man effect. While Sonic may be on an island with few residents, Mega Man is one of them. Mega Man had a very similar start, with Mega Man 2 being Capcom's second best-selling game ever at the time of release. However, it encountered another set of problems. The first was series burnout, with 6 games released on the NES alone and 8 games released in the main series over a 10-year span. The next issue was caused in part by a more profitable spin-off from the main game of identical design called Mega Man X. At the time of release, it was the 3rd best-selling game connected to the Mega Man property, only bested by Mega Man 2 and 3. I believe this largely influenced Capcom to refocus Mega Man to a new genre not connected to the main series line, while turning over the main series game mechanics to the spin-off, and thus was born the Mega Man Legends series, which was an adventure game set in the Mega Man universe. There are a couple interesting things to note here. First off, Mario had already set expectations for a game series moving from 2D to a 3D environment. I think for Nintendo, Mario 64 was about capturing a new audience while giving their existing and aging fanbase something that would continue pulling them in. For Mega Man's developer, it was seen a bit differently. Naturally, I'd like to focus our efforts on the Mega Man Legends series for a while. There's a lot of things I'd like to develop further with the series, not just the game. Kids, you see, know Mega Man pretty well, but its popularity has not expanded much to older age groups. For that, I think we've got to take the world in this game and bring it to other mediums. Mega Man Legends was well received, but it didn't sell well. Still, Capcom stuck with the series, trying to connect with an expanded audience, but it never worked out, and the series was placed on hold while moving Mega Man to a new genre, the RPG, via the hugely popular Battle Network series. There's something interesting to consider here though. Was Mega Man Legends first in the idea of moving a landmark series in another direction due to the evolution of technology? Prior to its release, there were games like Super Mario RPG and Pac-Land, but these were spin-offs and not intended to take the main series in a new or fresh direction. It could be said that Mega Man Legends helped pioneer this idea. Not yet the idea of an adventure game, fetch quest, or how it could be achieved in a 3D environment, but the idea of transitioning a popular property over to another genre and running with that instead. This is something we continue to see executed with greater success. Games such as Warcraft and Gods of War seemingly had run their course in the original game design and moved on in a successful attempt to maintain and grow their fanbase by taking it in a new and positive direction. Sega was slow to adapt, with the main issue centered on not being able to design compelling gameplay capable of evolving Sonic as a running platformer from 2D to the third dimension, much like Nintendo was able to with Mario 64. So a new idea was set forth to build a game more in line with a narrative-driven action-adventure than a running platformer. In 1998, Sonic Adventure released for the Dreamcast to high praise. There was just one issue. It wasn't a traditional Sonic game, and no new traditional Sonic platformer would release for any marquee home console for decades. While Sonic action-adventure games would continue to release on major consoles, the running platformer would be relegated to handheld systems, mobile releases, budget digital downloads, and every single one of these would be handled outside of Sega by contract developers. This wasn't the last parallel between Mega Man and Sonic though. In 2008, Mega Man 9 released, 12 years after Mega Man 8. The game was a throwback to the original NES games, with its design being strictly influenced by that era, and it was a smashing success. That same year, the managing head of Team Sonic stated in an interview, "One of our ideas has been that on older consoles, you may have only had 16 colors. One thing we could do is make a game like Mega Man 9, do a new Sonic, but in an old style." The result was a budget title called Sonic 4, released in episodic form and first distributed on the iPhone before moving on to other platforms. The game was developed by Dimps and was widely panned, resulting in the planned game being cancelled before the final episode was released. Sega had set high expectations for die-hard fans of the original series, and Mega Man had proven that there was still a strong desire for new games that remained in line with what made it an icon. Sega appeared clueless though as they dropped the ball, fully missing the mark of fan expectations, while further cementing the perception they had a clear lack of ability to innovate. The final conclusion. What comes next? Sega has a new Sonic game on the horizon, and this time they seem to realize some of their past mistakes. In a 2022 interview with Tatsumi, the producer of Sonic game development over the last decade discussed a long-standing company focus for the Sega game series that targeted elementary-aged children. Moving forward, Sega now hopes to reach an older demographic, starting with the upcoming release of Frontiers, part of which they will try to accomplish by constructing a non-linear open-world experience, different than any prior game's approach. Personally, I'm not convinced that this will address the long-standing issues at hand, composed of 20-plus years of grossly mishandling the series. Sonic's mediocre success has created a cyclical system where there's enough support to continue down the wrong path without the financial shortfall to give the reality check needed for major directional changes. Sonic as a series will continue to sell games regardless of if they are good, and that's one of the largest problems this series faces moving forward. I find the idea of Sonic and Mario being direct competitors an interesting concept. Consider this: Mario as a mainstream series with a little incompetence could have faced a near identical situation. In the mid-90s, Mario RPG released on the SNES. It was followed by the long-running Paper Mario series starting in 2000. Now imagine for a moment that Nintendo stopped making Mario games after Super Mario World 2, which released in 1995. Instead, you just got regular releases of Paper Mario presented as the mainline Mario games. Anything connected to the original series was pushed onto handhelds while being created by non-Nintendo development houses, and none of the 3D games starting with Mario 64 would ever release. That, in a nutshell, is exactly what happened to Sonic. Every Sonic game considered a mainstream series release is just a continuation of the idea, game design, and genre that started with Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast. From 1998 until today, all first-party developed Sonic games are indeed adventure games with Sonic in them, doing Sonic-like stuff. Since 1994, Sega hasn't developed a traditional mainstream Sonic game in the sense of the original genre that made that series popular. The only exception comes with a caveat. Sonic Mania is the sole traditional Sonic game to release for a current generation home system in nearly 30 years. It's a 16-bit inspired masterpiece, but it wasn't Sega's idea, and they didn't develop it. Sonic Mania was created out of frustration by fans who had been waiting on a new release in the series since 1994. Still, when Sega saw what they had accomplished on their own, they jumped on board, making the project officially connected to and published by Sega. The divide between fans is understandable because it's no different than expecting someone to enjoy Mario Golf simply because they like Mario Kart, or expecting the 3 fans of Shaq Fu to also enjoy NBA games because some of those also have Shaquille O'Neal as a playable character. The Sega that exists today is literally not the same company that made all the original Sonic games. All these years later, we're left with a series that has not grown or attempted to appeal to fans as they age out of the target demographic. With the emergence of a well-received movie series and a new game that will attempt to correct some of these past mistakes, there's a smidgen of hope that this may be an opportunity to turn things around before it's too late. An opportunity to make games that will appeal to fans of all ages while maintaining a higher standard of quality and possibly give an occasional nod to fans who were left behind with the death of the Mega Drive. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.